Good evening. It's 7 o'clock, so we're going to start. Welcome to the last meeting of Scrutiny Panel 1, covering housing and environment. We are live on Teams, so we have some colleagues that have joined online. Any apologies for absence? I've not received any apologies, but I believe our COP team member, Ben Toomey, is joining us online. He's not online yet, but I'm sure he'll join. There he is. Perfect timing. And any urgent matters? I've not been notified of any urgent matters. Declaration of interest? None, thank you. Any matters to be considered in private? I haven't been informed of any. Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting. Do we agree the minutes of the meeting held on 21st of November? Agreed, thank you. Just wanted to remind members that I think in our last meeting, if you recall, we mentioned that we wanted to bring what work the council is doing on the energy efficiency in our council housing, and this was agreed that we would bring it into this meeting. Unfortunately, this wasn't possible, so we can look at recommending that for next year's panel. That is something that we could look at because they're currently beginning to recruit for that role, so that's why we couldn't bring it into this meeting. And I have two other updates that I need to give before we start. So we had a meeting in September, and in that meeting, it was mentioned about the damp and mold and how long it takes for that to be looked into. It was the delay basically of the contractors. I raised that with the cabinet member and also the strategic director for housing and environment and received a response that was circulated to everybody, and a reassurance was given that this has been something that they are addressing and they have reduced the numbers and the delay. So we've all received that update. In terms of another update, Councillor Haley has joined. The meeting that we had in November, it was on rough sleeping, and a brief update on that is on the council's progress. So I wanted to share a brief update on the tackling rough sleeping, which we previously discussed, and Carlos Nayo was the person, the officer that presented. The 2024 National Rough Sleeping Snapshot was published recently, and I'm pleased to report that Ealing has achieved one of the largest absolute reductions in rough sleeping across the country. From being 5th highest in England last year and 4th in London, we are now no longer in the top 10. So that is good news. I know we still have issues of rough sleeping in the borough, but in terms of general numbers, it has reduced. So, and this is a significant step forward. Again, work still needs to be done, but I want to thank everyone and all officers involved for their commitment about that. So that is my updates on those two. We move on to tonight's agenda, waste and recycling update. So we are joined by Councillor Paul Driscoll, who is the cabinet member, Katerina Pack, head of street care and waste management, Jess Murray, assistant director for community protection. Katerina, to take away, thank you.
Share some slides here, thank you. Thanks very much. It's just loading on my screen. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much. So I'll just do a brief introduction and share some photos from the weekend, and we'll go from there. Thank you. So Ealing's current recycling rate, this is to the end of December, is 49.17%, and we're ranked second in London for recycling rate based on 23-24 figures, which are the most recent available. The pandemic led to changes in waste volumes and composition. So whilst we're seeing a recovery, there is still some improvement to be made to recover to pre-pandemic levels of 50.35% and further encourage waste reduction, increase reuse, repair and recycling. So there's work to obviously further increase opportunities for residents. There's a number of initiatives that we have in place already. So wide-ranging waste and recycling services that residents have available from home, supplementary services, so e-waste, textiles collections, bring sites and the household reuse and recycling centre. We're continuing to roll out food waste recycling collections to flats. The next phase of deliveries that are happening now will bring us up to 54% coverage. We're also trialling food waste recycling collections in flats above shops. There's a number of other circular activities that we're doing, which I will run through now. So we're in the process of transforming the former waste and recycling site at Stirling Road to create Reacton Circular Hub. So a space for residents to repair, reuse, recycle electronics, bicycles, furniture, clothes and lots more. And we had an event on the 29th of March attended by panel members, thank you for attending, the portfolio holder, council officers and over 80 residents. So partners include West London Waste Authority, the Ealing Repair Cafe. They ran sewing skills workshops and upcycling textiles workshops on the day. West Central London Fixers, they're an electrical item repair charity that were assisting us on the day. Collect for Reuse with bike repair and reuse sales, and Capdar, which have their AI sorting facility for sorting out textiles and onward recycling. So more events are in the pipeline for the spring summer and plan to open the site permanently later this year. Just share a couple more photos from the afternoon. And we have permission from these residents, so a scooter and a toaster fixed and an upcycled draft excluder here using old textiles. So moving on to other initiatives, the ultra low waste neighbourhood in Acton. We've supported several community events here, delivered food waste caddies, liners and leaflets to reinvigorate that service there. And we're encouraging swapping to smaller rubbish bins upcoming. We've been working with Acton Market and their Reduce and Recycle Hub. So clothing repairs, book clothes swaps, bike repairs and reuse sales, as well as recycling of electricals, textiles, batteries and light bulbs. We've installed the Library of Things in Ealing Broadway, and so far items borrowed 643 since opening in July, which is the equivalent of 4 tonnes of electrical items reused and 12 tonnes of carbon saved. The Pupils Profit School Refill Programme is running in 7 schools across the borough. They run shops on site regularly, and over 100 bottles have been refilled. And Spring Hello School also run a pop-up refill shop in Ealing Broadway. So they've got 5 more dates coming up in April and May. If you're in the Ealing Broadway area, I can share those dates. We've got a number of other upcoming projects that I'm sure we'll talk more about this evening, but just to mention a few around e-waste recycling collections in schools, focusing more on textiles reuse, becoming a refill destination, so joining City to Sea's initiative and actively promoting refill in Ealing. There was more detail on legislative change in the report, so I won't go into too much detail here, but just to note that there's currently significant legislative change that impacts waste and recycling across England, including the extended producer responsibility for packaging, simpler recycling, which affects businesses now and residents in a year's time, the deposit return scheme, the emissions trading scheme. So there's mitigations to reduce cost implications required. So reducing waste, keeping items in use for longer and recycling. And just showing you the diagram here, on the left-hand side shows overall tonnage of items or different materials, and on the right-hand side shows the carbon intensity. So the focus will need to be on removing the high fossil content items, so food waste, textiles, oil-based plastics and e-waste. So thank you very much. And does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation and the photos. We did go on a visit on, was it last Saturday? Yeah, on Saturday. Yeah, to the Reacton Stirling Road circular hub, I guess, and it was really interesting to see. I mean, it felt temporary because it's not open fully yet and it's going through planning and whatnot, but it was really interesting to see everything in action, especially seeing that massive lorry there that, you know, it was captor, yeah, and it and learning about that, I personally learned a lot, and I think we do have some feedback from panel members that were there, and I'm not pointing at anybody but Councillor Martin. I believe you've got something filled up, so you've got your feedback form that you might want to, just give. So
okay, I'll start then. Observations and findings. Enjoyed the layout. Thought that was well presented, and obviously with the temporary situation, yeah, it worked. Repair and reuse and the resale of the bikes, exceptional. I've got to say I've not seen any other, and even when I googled it, any other borough doing that, to be quite honest. So again, another big bonus. Loved the idea of the Ealing 135 party kit hire facility. I think that is something I think we need to promote a little bit more of. Because again, I've sort of checked around a few other members across our towns, and they're not aware of that scheme. So I think that's something that we could do a little bit more. Slight concern about the location. That was the only sort of real negativity that sort of people getting there. We've got lots of people from Acton. My concern was just how other towns are going to get there. With transport facilities, and I suppose it's something that I sort of thought a lot about when it comes to the library of things, is if someone, say for argument's sake, is coming to hire a lawnmower, the question is, and I just emphasise on the lawnmower, they're not going to wheel that home, are they? And it's just how we're looking at what locations and whether or not this is a base that we could have a library of things at, because it does have sort of areas where you can pull up and park. But I suppose the main thing here is we're trying to encourage people to use active travel, but it's just what we can do to assist, i.e. is there potentially an observation here that we could actually add a delivery service to it, to the actual site. Another sort of question that sort of just sat in the back of my mind is, if we can make this work and we look at a few changes, how many can we roll out across the towns and how quickly could that be done? And I loved the Capita project. However, I was a little concerned just at the costings. The main reason behind that was talking to the individuals running it. They have the flatbed lorry, but they don't have the cab and the actual driving machinery, and they don't have a driver. So they were telling me that that was costing £600 a day to come in. So it's just as to what the costings may be for that and what sort of business model we've got sort of set up looking at it as to whether or not that might work. That's it for now anyway.
Thank you. I think in terms of Capita, because they are an independent business, so they're not part of, it's just a company that Ealing Council collabs with. So it's not the council that is technically paying the £600 for the driver, but and it's a startup company. They've been in business for about 12 months. So hopefully they are growing and they are getting, one of the questions was what sort of grants are you getting? And they are growing and they have plans for future proofing the business model, I guess. But yeah.
My question was around about what would it cost us to run that, And in theory, are we looking sort of at a 1 year or a 5-year plan to try and encourage people to bring those textiles to that site?
Shall I come back on those now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much for that feedback. And I do think we can communicate more widely some of those items, particularly around the party kits and reusable nappies and those sorts of things. So thank you for that. In terms of the location, there will be a regional offer, I think, so across West London Waste Authority. So their idea and their plan is that there will be circular hubs in each borough. So for now, it's Acton in Ealing, but you know, there could well be something else in the future, and certainly across borough boundaries. So they'd be open to people across each of the constituent boroughs. Delivery service we'd have to look into, but thank you for that feedback. A lot of the items at the Library of Things at the moment are smaller, but understood that lawnmowers and larger items are things that you might only use at certain times of the year. So. And CAPTA, yes, they are working with Kingston Council currently. They're quite new, as Councillor Hamidi said, so I think we'll follow them with interest and whether they can supplement some of the other textiles recycling that we do. They work with the off-takers and recyclers, and so we work with the Salvation Army and Trade currently, and it's, I think, those types of organisations that CAPTA work with, but it's new that they're working with Kingston, so we will follow that. Thank you.
Just to add about West London Waste, I think it's often forgotten that we are part of a consortium of 6 authorities, and there's a huge investment plan, capital investment from West London Waste planned. There's a lot of discussions and negotiations that need to be had to that, but it's actually a very active discussion. So it's not something that is thought about but not being acted upon. There's real live investigations in this. So I want to really reassure you that, and we should be thinking about the east and west of the borough. I completely appreciate the point that Stirling Road is very much on the eastern edge of that borough, but when we look at the locations that we have for other authorities, then they would, like Hounslow, would be way better for location for the south and the west of the borough. So and Harrow for the north. So that sort of cooperation will be key going forward. So and there are live discussions that are happening there.
Thank you. I've got a few questions about the slide and the presentation, but if other panel members have questions, please let me know. Yes, so I'll ask my question first. So you said about the boroughs, you said about the boroughs recycling rate, and that's improved to 49.17%. I mean, that is encouraging, but just so that we get a better understanding, what specific changes do you think has contributed most to this increase, and like how confident are we about reaching or exceeding the pre-pandemic level, which was over 50%? Are we aiming to get there, or?
Thank you. We would hope that we can get back to the 50%. We need to do more with residents, obviously, around the food waste recycling. That is a big target for us, and that should enable us to have further tonnage that would improve that rate. Big service change will enable a large increase. So the big increase that we had in the past of 5% from the sort of lower 40s to the high 40s was changing to the fortnightly collections, so the alternate weekly collections for residual waste and recycling, which forced people perhaps to use the weekly food waste collection more and think about how they're disposing of their waste because it was on that alternate weekly service. So other things that we do have smaller impacts, but each thing that we do has an impact. So obviously we need to focus on particular materials. So we do waste composition analysis regularly. We've just had the most recent one back. Happy to share some results of that with the panel. And that shows us that we need to target textiles because that is being found in the residual waste. Food waste is about 35% of the residual waste bin. There's a small bit of electrical items, so that's another one we need to target. Also in terms of tonnage, but also because they can create fires. So we need to make sure that we're educating residents around that. So in terms of reaching or exceeding pre-pandemic levels, all of the things that we do create those small differences. We're almost at that 50% now. I can't say exactly when it might be, but with introducing the food-based services to flats and continuing to do that, we hope to get there.
Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Couple of questions, three actually. What's the definition of ultra low waste? Ultra particularly is what. Second was, I know I mentioned it on Saturday, and I felt quite guilty because I went over to Hammersmith side to dispose of things in their wee banks. So what's the when can I think you gave an answer, but perhaps for the record where we are on that. And just on the food collection in the flats, because I'm sharing interest in this, because the first time we had them was in my development in Bromley on Owls, and I think it didn't work for whatever reason, and I'm not quite sure in those big developments we have how it will quite work. Because I still have the little bin, but I've got nowhere to put the little caddy things because it's all going in the main waste, isn't it? So I guess what's the rollout in that sense, and how it might work.
Thank you. So in terms of the ultra low waste neighbourhood, we want residents to think differently about waste and recycling. So we want to engage with them in a different way, which is why we've been running events in the community and engaging with a specific set of households. There's more we want to do. It's an ongoing programme, so happy to update you on what the next activities are in that area. But one of the items will be to encourage residents to perhaps use or think about their waste generation and perhaps have a smaller bin, swap to a smaller bin. Obviously not necessarily for all households because there are some certain needs at some households, but we're continuing to work with that. And yeah, as I say, I'll happily update you on the next activities. With regards to the electrical banks, yes, we did discuss this. I've discussed it with a couple of councillors. The electrical banks that we have for recycling were funded some years ago. We know that we need to replace 2, which we are doing. We just need to order those. We now have an appropriate company that can do that for us. And we're looking into whether there's additional funding for further sites because we know that people have small electrical items. We want them to be recycled. We don't want them to go into the residual waste or the recycling bins. We do also have an arrangement with trade where you collect from home textiles, but also small electricals, so an appointment can be made for that. But understand that, yes, we need to make sure that we make that accessible to our residents. And food waste collection in flats, we're currently at 40% coverage, and we've got a number of sites being rolled out to at the moment. We've got an officer going out with the crews and making sure that those deliveries are happening exactly as they're meant to. So she's out every day at the moment doing that. And when this round of deliveries finish, we'll be up to 54% coverage. And by next March is when we need to have that service provided across the borough in terms of providing a food waste recycling service to all properties. So we have some time to complete that.
This is not about me, honestly, but how does it work in practice?
Oh, sorry.
For food collection for the flats. I come and dump my rubbish bag in the main rubbish area in development. So I'm just wondering how it works with.
So we'd provide an indoor caddy and a starter roll of liners and a leaflet. There'd be a communal bin outside in the bin room or in a housing unit externally if there isn't space inside in the bin room. And we'd ask the resident to, if they are using liners, tie the liner up. They can either bring their caddy down, take the liner out and put it in the communal bin, or if the liner is intact, because obviously sometimes you get some leakage of food waste. If it's intact, they could take that down directly to that bin.
That could work.
Sorry, I know this is very cool. So, because we had those big bins, are they bin? It's not those type of bins then, because I just think how people do it. Sorry.
So
because they got really smelly and everything else, which is why I thought it got abandoned. That's why I'm just trying to understand what's the bins that they'll dump it into.
We've got a couple of different versions. So some have a metal housing unit outside and there's a bin inside and there's a flap at the top. And there's another version that we're using, which is a slightly smaller wheelie bin, which has a lockable lid and then a flap that opens on the top. We can clean them. I know that managing agents often clean their own bins. We have a programme with housing properties where we will clean the bins or swap them out if there's a need.
I think just as I understand it, we need to think about the locality. So there's obviously space restrictions and access and things like that. So those models are kind of put out dependent on what works in that specific site. So it might be different depending on what the accessibility is, what the road and street layout is, like particularly above shops and things like that is slightly different, as well as, you know, purpose-built flats and things like that. So it's not going to be uniform necessarily.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. We have Ben online. You have your hand up.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sorry I can't be there, and sorry I couldn't join you last weekend. It sounds like a fantastic visit. Thanks so much for this presentation. I've just got a question about the legislative changes that are coming. You've got that slide that's really, really helpful, and you can see the complexity and number of changes that you're trying to react to. I was just wondering if, in relation to that, it looks like there's a lot of things that you're having to respond to and get ready for, but is there an Ealing version of this? Do we have any targets or commitments that are Ealing based, either coming from the council or elsewhere?
Thank you. So we're working on that at the moment, so that we'll have a position statement. So where we are now, where the gaps are, overlaying the legislative change, so that we see what we need to do by certain dates. So that's absolutely something that we can have a version of that we'll be able to share.
That's brilliant, because it looks like you're kind of ahead of the game on a few things. But I just wonder as well if you have an impression of, are you finding that all of these commitments and the number of things that you need to do with a limited budget and limited team is like you're getting battered around a bit, or is it more like all running smoothly and you've got plenty of advance warning and it's coming together nicely?
So I think probably not quite there in that context. Some of this stuff is and different timeframes, and it's coming from, it's important to note in that context, it's coming from different government departments, and so they're looking at their specific priority area or what they want to achieve, and are obviously setting an objective. And you know, I don't want to disparage any colleagues working in central government, but sometimes they don't necessarily communicate across various different areas. So there is a little bit of rationalisation that comes from that, but also the timelines aren't uniform either. And also the guidance hasn't been issued for all of that. So some stuff we have a much clearer idea on what the requirements will be. Other stuff we have a very general idea of what the ambition is without necessarily the detail around it. But it's worth noting, as Councillor Driscoll outlined, we're part of the West London Waste arrangement, and they're obviously collectively looking at all of the boroughs within that context, and the changes affect all authorities. So they're also taking a key lead role in working with each of the boroughs within the arrangement and helping us develop our uniform approach, comparing notes, looking at, you know, where different people are in different kinds of areas of change and stuff like that. And we've also just recently taken on some consultancy support around getting exactly what you're suggesting, a bit of a plan for Ealing. What does it mean, when and how do the corresponding bits affect each other, because there's lots of moving parts on that timeline. So we can put a plan in place, because for me it's about it's anticipating the change and making sure we're not incurring future costs so we can get ahead of it, and you know, maximise the amount of recycling and impact that we can make, whilst also not taking on any new burdens or costs for the organisation wherever possible, and get the best outcome for residents. So the objective's there, and that's our ambition, but we're still trying to get through the detail with the steers from government, and I think also government are trying to reconcile all the different ambitions they have around this, which makes it quite complex. So
thanks so much.
Councillor Driscoll.
I mean, I don't think it should be underestimated sort of the huge changes that are coming down the line legislatively, and you can see from that sort of timeline, they're all concertinaed very tightly together, and then they sort of peter off slightly. So the only relief from that is that it's happening nationally. So whereas you could move from borough to borough, city to city, and you'd have a different arrangement for how many boxes, how many wheelie bins, how many arrangements you have, you'd have to learn how it was done locally. There'll be more consistency across the country. So you will have an expectation that you're going to be recycling food. You'll have an expectation that this is how it's done. So in terms of that, getting that behaviour change, we'll be seeing that people moving around, and we've got a significant amount of churn in the borough in terms of residents moving within and between boroughs. So hopefully, as this new system comes in and embeds itself, we will have more of an expected way that people they'll anticipate the same thing everywhere they're going, which is good. I mean, the challenges are huge. We do have funding through EPR, Extended Producers Responsibility Funding. So that's significant. It's like 4.2 million. However, the amount of work that's got to be done for that, both in terms of delivering behaviour change, which is going to be crucial, but also in terms of the information and data gathering to look at embodied carbon and how we are delivering our waste and recycling services is also huge. So we've got a lot of complex demands that are coming along. So there's some good things with that, with consistency, but how we meet that in such a short time frame is going to be a real challenge.
Just prompted a thought my end as well, in the context that we also have to wait to see how producers react, because obviously there will be additional cost associated with the current program. And so obviously manufacturers will look at how they can change their packaging arrangements to offset that cost, which we will then need to watch very closely, anticipate, and then be able to react to. So different things around carton use and stuff like that might be more of a preference for them, given it would attract less of a cost. So I suppose it's part of seeing how the market reacts to the legislation and then trying to anticipate and prepare for that as well. So it's a bit of watching and seeing in there too.
Thank you. I agree with what Councillor Driscoll said about behaviour change. I mean, many of the circular economy initiatives rely on changing resident behaviours. But having said that, you know, how are we ensuring that waste reduction messaging is getting, you know, we're reaching residents that English isn't their first language? And, you know, let's talk about Southall, for example. Southall will be one of the difficult areas to get that message to. So how are we working on getting the message across to all residents, English speaking or not so?
I mean, there's particular projects we're working on in Southall which cover waste behaviours and including fly tipping. So within that, there'll certainly be some translations and some engagement with the community groups, faith groups, etc. So that should help in that sense, just start talking about the message. We do need to do more borough-wide, and part of the funding, part of that will be to do more waste recycling communications that is specific, so that we can have a space where people can have a look on a website and find all of the information that they need in a really user-friendly way. So there's that can be translated as well online for residents. So it's definitely something we need to look at with the changes. So as we develop where we need to be within Ealing and the changes that we will be doing here, we'll need to communicate much more regularly with our residents.
Councillor Type.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just want to start by recognising that Ealing is ranked second in London for recycling. I just think it's something worth, you've touched on, Chair, but I think it's really something, it's kind of to recognise the efforts of the team and also residents in Ealing. I just think it's, as I look at the table and I'm looking around the other places, I just think it's fab that we're consistently in the top 3, but now in second place, which is fab. I wanted to ask about the library of things, and if we're kind of capturing feedback from users of it. Obviously the numbers speak for themselves, and it's great to see there's, you know, the numbers are going up, but just if we've kind of heard from them on what their feedback is, if we're kind of capturing any, and if we're doing any surveys, anything like that. Also kind of finding out how they heard about it. Is it a word of mouth thing? Is it through the magazine, our videos, those kind of things? And I was curious with the library of things, I feel like it's unique to Ealing, or are there versions of it elsewhere we're keeping an eye on too? And I also had a question on the Pupils Profit initiative, just to hear a bit about that. I was glad to see a Hanwell School mentioned, Brentside Primary School, but just to understand a little about the initiative, haven't come across it before, so just to hear more. Thanks.
Thank you. So in terms of the Library of Things, we do contact those that borrow. So I think we have quotes and pictures that we're using in some of the social media, but maybe we need to push those out a little bit further. But it is positive. But in terms of a survey or how they heard about it, we can speak to Library of Things about that. They do some of their own communications. So with the database, we've got a big email database there of about 1,800 residents. So I think we can definitely do something there. And there's also residents can request other items to go into the Library of Things. So they are changed seasonally. So there's different things coming now for spring. But if there's particular items that residents would like to see there, there is a request form. So perhaps we need to do a little bit more there. It's not unique to Ealing. I think they have, I don't know the number over London, but there's certainly Hammersmith and Fulham and some of the more central London boroughs have a Library of Things. But there's other opportunities there, I think, as Councillor Martin mentioned earlier, whether there's other things that we can do with our own sites, an equivalent Library of Things. And then on Pupils Profit, so this was funded through the Carbon Offset Fund. So the funding was received for 7 schools to introduce this. So they're given a kit, they work with Pupils Profit, the organisation, and they then can set up their own shops, and they're given guide prices for what it would cost to for all the refills. So they're selling things like, well, shampoo bars, which are obviously solid, but the refills of things like soap. And the Spring Hello school, which is the one I mentioned, which is a post-16 SEN school, they have taken it upon themselves to do these pop-up shops as well, which is excellent. So they're getting the message out there about refill and environment, but also, developing their own skills, talking to members of the public and money and finance and that side of it as well.
Councillor Sue?
Sorry. Again, to highlight what Claire said, it's great that we are the second in the London boroughs to essentially just be great at recycling, which is fantastic. The one question I did have was, so regarding the new policy that's come in since the 31st of March, how has it affected Ealing in terms of, we have quite a few like commercial spaces all around with the Ealing borough, so how is that going to affect it in terms of disposal of waste? But also, are there fines and penalties, and how is that managed and monitored going forward as well? Because I know with the new structure, it will take a little bit of time for businesses to accommodate. So is there a leeway period that you're putting in? And if they're after that leeway period, they're still reoffending, how are we managing that internally? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so the simpler recycling impacts businesses from the 31st of March this year, whereas residents, or households, 31st of March 2026. Micro firms are excluded from this initial rollout, so they will need to comply by the 31st of March 2027. They have 2 more years. The onus is on the business to recycle. So we as a local authority, we provide a commercial waste service, and we're providing information to our customers about that commercial waste service, but it's up to the customer or the business to fulfil that requirement. So we don't have an enforcement angle on that. We have we're providing information and education, and if we're requested to provide that service, then we provide that to those businesses.
Councillor Sizemos?
Now that the garden waste is only 3 months, is 3 months is not active, has there been any garden waste put in the residual waste?
We wouldn't have data on that yet. The last waste composition analysis was done in November, December, so we'll be able to see where it is there and then when the next one is. So it's something that we will be able to have a look at and see if there's a change. lots of residents were pleased that the service restarted following the pause, some hoping that we'll see the figures go up from that end of February, March time. There was a slight increase of tonnages over the pause period at the HRRC, but equally it's quite a low growing part of the season.
One more question, but one more comment. The leaves fell later last year than other years. A lot of people put leaves in their bin, but anyway, just saying. The other thing is the deposit scheme. Is it going to be set up on the borough's land, or is it going to be a place where people can go and put their plastic?
So the deposit return scheme, there'll be a scheme administrator appointed, and I think those reverse vending type machines, I'm sure they will feature, but we've not been given any more information on that currently.
Yeah, it's early days for the DRS stuff.
Can I just comment that in Australia it's a really big thing, and people like pensioners supplement their income by collecting plastic. It's like a really big thing.
My dad included.
I know in Germany they love doing that as well, but hopefully we can, I think it will take time, but we'll get there. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Can I invite you formally to the High Street Task Force so that you can speak to our bids, traders associations, because I think this is a really, really good sort of project, and also I think just to give the knowledge to those individuals. And secondly, I couldn't see anything in there. Is there any, I suppose, areas about looking at cooking oils moving forward? Because one of the, I suppose, problems we certainly have, certainly based in Southall, is we have a lot of block drains from people pouring cooking oil down the drains. And is there a facility somewhere there that we, moving forward, that could be included?
Thank you. I'd happily attend the High Street Task Force and talk about legislative change in waste. Around cooking oils, there are some commercial companies that will collect it. So there's one I'm aware of. I would need to check whether they're still running in Ealing, but it's something we can look into because there are obviously a lot of restaurants and cooking facilities in Ealing.
But not just for restaurants, is it something that we could do for residents? And is there a sort of central point as such that we could try and look at? It'd be really useful, that one.
Thank you, Councillor Martin, for your question. I have a question as well, and then if you want to take two questions actually, because it's going to be brief, my one. In terms of I know we kind of covered the policy changes that is coming in, the EPR, DRS, ETS, all of that. What are we doing as a council to prepare for these changes and support businesses and households? So what plan do we have for businesses mainly, and how are we going to support them? And Councillor Siddy, do you want to come in with your question as well? So.
Sorry, just to build up on Councillor Martin's point, I know that Greenford has an oil disposal system there, but it's quite hard for residents who are travelling that don't have vehicles or don't have exactly access to public transport to dispose of their oil. This was something I brought up about 2 meetings ago within Scrutiny about oil disposal. So is it possible we can maybe put it down as a recommendation as to something that needs to be had a look at? Because we've had loads of issues, especially within Southall, with Thames Water saying our pipes are blocked up. What's the issue? Everyone's pouring vegetable oil down their drains, unfortunately. So if there could be like a pickup point near like a restaurant or a local cafe where we could do some sort of collection, or if it's just they pour it in a bottle and it gets put in somewhere separate as a separate collection instead, that'd be great. Thank you.
Could I just say something on that? What is the recommended way of getting rid of oil? Well, I have a way. There is a way that they tell you to do it in Australia, but I'm just wondering what.
So very small amounts could go in your food waste bin, but obviously you don't want lots of liquid oil. So it can be hard, you know, leave it to harden and put that in with the food waste. But otherwise it would be just to harden it in a bottle and it would go in with the residual waste if it can't be taken to the household reuse and recycling centre. So it's certainly something we can look at. I'm not sure if there's implications in terms of having a site, because it needs to be a bunded container and there's specific things associated with oil, which is why it's at a licensed recycling centre. So it's something that we can look at though, whether there's any other collection points that we could offer. Shall I pick up the other question?
And then my question on how we're planning on supporting businesses with the policy changes coming
in. So it's at the moment it's communicating with our own customers. So we've done telephone calls to all of our customers to inform them of the changes, but also to ask how many employees they have, because there's a bit more time for micro firms, as I mentioned earlier. So with less than 10 employees, have a little bit longer to enable them to make changes to how they dispose of their waste and recycling. So it's on the website as well. There's a lot nationally that I've seen, but then maybe I keep an eye out for waste related things. But we can definitely look at a communications plan around that for businesses, and then residents will come once we've got this position statement of where we are in Ealing and where the gaps are and any changes that we might need to make. And we need to have a comms plan and strategy in place for that.
It's just worth noting, though, I think in the context of commercial, it's a different relationship than with household. And so loads of commercial don't contact the council. They use private companies to manage their waste and things like that. And so I think whilst we would promote stuff, and I think the comm stuff is a good shout, High Street Task Force, those kinds of things, it's a slightly different relationship as of compared to what we do for residents and household waste. And so it's slightly differential. We're one player of many in the context of commercial waste in terms of what we offer, and they have a choice to where they go with that. I think it's also worth noting, I think when we're looking at the new regulations, Ealing has a high proportion of micro businesses, I think, compared to other parts of London. So we do have a lot of small independents. So we think a lot of our commercial operators will actually get that exemption and get the additional 2 years. So it's also worth noting we'll probably have a higher number of those than some other boroughs as well.
Thank you. I know that there are businesses that use council for their commercial waste, and sometimes it works out cheaper than private companies, so it's good to use the council. Just wanted to check, I don't think there's any other questions, and if there are, do we have any other feedback about our visit from our colleagues online that they wanted to contribute anything? If I don't see any hands up, then we move on to comments and recommendations. Okay, I don't see any. That's fine. So we move on to our recommendations and comments. Anybody on the panel want to start? No? Okay, I've got a few. So in terms of the community engagement events, you've mentioned about the success of Library of Things, school-based reuse, education, and events like Swaps and Fix It Cafe. I'm sure panel would agree that we should look at borough-wide expansion of these events and better integration with schools, housing estates, and community centres for these events, just so that we have more residents getting involved and know about these, because a lot of these events seem to be around Ealing Broadway and Acton and nothing on the other side, and I think we do need to focus on that side of town as well. And maybe if we can get a 6 months update on our recycling trends borough-wide, and flats, the
flats above shops.
Flats above shops, yeah. So and also resource of the food-based service rollout. So to flats, and again flats above shops, that would be good. What else do we have? And I think personally, better digital awareness. We need to publicize more on what the council is doing about recycling and all of that, and possibly even putting out the numbers to say, oh, this is how many flats that we're working, we've rolled out food-based collection, just so people see these numbers, and it does make them think, actually, oh, maybe I can start doing that as well. So I think having that published is a good way of just engaging and getting more people to think about what the council is doing. And it's not like the council is just sitting there not doing anything. But when they see those numbers, it shows that you are working and this is what the council is doing. Are there any other comments that anybody wants to come in? Councillor Taylor?
No, it got me thinking because I don't. What's the issue? It was something at work recently. They actually got a more detailed kind of poster, which actually which bin could go in what, you know, and dry recyclables. I mean, with all due respect, I look at that as language. I don't know what that means now, you know. But then the different boroughs collect different things or something. So, you know, some people live on the boroughs. They might move from Hounslow to Southall or in my case, Shepherd's Bush to Acton or something, you know. They might be used to putting something in one bin over there, but it might not work in our side or something. So just that sort of communication sort of thing. And I know when we just did the rollout recycling a few years ago, people were keen. It's kind of maybe it's tailed off to some extent. Better communication.
Absolutely, better communication, visibility, social media visibility about upcoming events, collection schemes and reuse resources. And I think the last one was about the oil disposal for households mainly. So that could be something that we could potentially look at and see what we can do as a council to help. Councillor Tyke?
Yes, Chair, and just on the comms point, all these really good events, and I see them when they happen around Ealing, and I just wondered, sometimes when things are joined up and under the one banner, it's that kind of comms point Councillor Taylor was on about as well. I think sometimes even a logo or a campaign, you know, if you take, looking, we have Councillor Martin and I have talked about this before, kind of when you have a campaign on a high street and you get all the shops to kind of support locally, or you come up with a logo and it sort of, it joins all the dots. Because I found one day, and that's slightly tangent, but you know, talking to the streets on Greenford Avenue, there were so many issues in common, and we came up with this idea of doing a campaign and if we had like a simple logo that brought all these issues together and with simple messaging. So I think there's pride as well we can tap into, because it is a great achievement for residents of Ealing, and I wonder if people are aware that we are doing so well and that we are indeed like second across London, and maybe there's something, if we package it up and put it under the one banner, it might just kind of stir community spirit a bit. So thank you.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Of course.
I just want to add, can we strive to get wee banks in every town in Ealing? I mean, in the borough, sorry, in Ealing, you know what I mean? And textiles in residual waste, people actually don't know that they shouldn't put them in there. So we need to tell people, do not put them in there. Do not put them in the recycling. It's even worse when they put it in the recycling, because that will chuck out the whole truck. So, but we need to, if we tell them not to put them there, we have to tell them where they can put them. And people just chuck them in the bin. Which, you know, if we could take out so much of that textile and give it to Capita.
I think that falls on the education and, you know, people just people's behavior on, well, getting used to change, and this is how, you know, it may have been different 20 years ago, but times are moving and things are changing. And wheelie bins, I think some of the, you know, a lot of properties in the borough, they don't have the space for wheelie bins. Even though we all, you know, everybody wants a wheelie bin, but some properties, they can't actually get one. So, and that is why curbside schemes and things like that come in. So, and on that basis, I think Councillor City.
Sorry, it's just to build upon Councillor Zizamos' point. It was, I know Watford Borough, they have clothing bags that get delivered in through the posts, and then there's a collection that gets done, but it's not a charity one. It ends up being a council run one. So I know it probably a slightly lower down the grand scheme of things, but it was just something like that. And then if it goes into the schemes that we currently have using, so separating and sourcing materials so we can have textile refurbishment, I think it'd be something worth having a look at.
And I think we are done on our comments and recommendations. I think that's a big list. But yeah, do we agree on those? Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Councillor Driscoll, Katrina and Jess. Obviously the report was insightful. We learned, and the visit was very helpful for us as well. So thank you for your time. And we move on to the next item on our list. So you are free to leave now. You don't need to stay for the next part. So you all have received the panel's recommendation that we had over, well, what we covered on our panel this year. And it is, you know, you'll see that it's some of them, it's up to the 6-month mark for us to get an update. So I think if you would agree that we ask for the update to be brought in for the 25-26 panel. So in the first meeting, if they can bring in the updates for those. And I think if you have any suggestions for topics that we could possibly look at for the next panel, what would, if you have any recommendations on what we should look at, you have it? Well, that's good to know. No, but I think, you know, some of the, we could possibly look at some of the things that we covered this year, so it can be a continuation for next year, and we could put them forward for the next chair to consider. Councillor Martin?
Yeah, I sort of have to agree. I think the sort of damp and mould one is not something that's going to go away. So I think we've certainly got to have that there. I think just general accommodation and the condition, I think, is really important. I think we all pick up casework in relation to repairs. I think that's also something that we need to look at. So it's really mainly sort of more around the housing facts than anything else.
I mean, some of the topics that I thought would be helpful would be obviously the mobilization of the full IT system, because that was one of the things that it seems like we're behind on, and they've not been able to. And I think if we get a update, it's not going to be anything different to what we already know. And our housing stock, including voids, that needs to be looked into further in more detail. And like you said, repair performance in general, that is something that needs to be considered. And are there any other?
I mean, it's housing, but I think it's not so much about council housing, but also some of our housing association providers. You know, I mean, there is a regulation in place, but we've done this many years ago. I don't think we've come back to it. And the amount of stock they've got, and the response for a lot of our residents, some of them, you know, low income and vulnerable households as well. And it's getting the big players in L&Q, A2 Dominion.
Is this an opportunity for us to hold managing agents to account?
Well, I love that one, because all my.
But is this the group that we could do that at, where we could invite one of them too?
I think that would be, because it needs to be something that the council has some sort of responsibility over. You know, if it's an outside body, we can't really bring them in because they're not part of the council.
But if we had some shared housing in there, or we have some facilities within those buildings, surely we have a right. So if we put some tenants in there, we have a right to bring a managing agent in front of us. No,
they wouldn't be our tenants though. They would. So once they sign on to, for example, let's say a house A2 Dominion, for example, then they would sign a contract with other providers are available, of course, and you know, they would be A2 Dominion tenants. They are no longer Ealing Council tenants. So that is why our responsibility is no longer, it goes on to, but it's something that we can look.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, well.
sorry, could we do it that we're bringing we could bring sort of the housing associations here, and as one of the tasks that we send them away to do by holding them to account is to then go back to the managing agents. So it's in a slightly different way, but it's thinking outside the box.
I think we should explore on that more and see if that is something that can be considered, because we can certainly look into that. And I think on that note, I just want to obviously thank everybody for being on this year's panel. It's, you know, and we're done, yes. I mean, the topics that we covered are very important, and the work of this panel itself and the recommendations that we make, it can make a difference to our, you know, our residents. So it's very important that we have an input and look at what these departments are doing and how we can work better with them. Councillor Taylor.
No, so no, absolutely right. And there's two things I want to say is, you know, well done in chairing of meetings as well, in terms of you've done it, and also the fact that you allowed those questions to happen. You know, I mean, I've had to help myself back because of housing issues, but you know, the first couple of meetings we've had, and it was holding them to account, which was really important. You know, and because it would be easy to say, no, let's just carry on. It's our service, so don't worry about it. And I think that's important because it recognised that we have responsibility for looking out for the welfare of our residents, you know, and so well done.
Thank you.
And I get to thank you.
Thank you very much for being a good vice chair. And also I think it's important that we should thank Anna-Marie for all your help and support this year. It's, you've been amazing, and this wouldn't have been possible without your help. So thank you very much. And on that note, we are done. So thank you very much, everybody. Good night.